Hey everyone. So why am I doing this segment? So one of the things that has been a reoccurring theme on this channel has been a comment that I have made. And that is that one of my dear friends challenged me some months ago about what is gender and discussing gender as a concept. Before this, I sort of identified loosely as a gender abolitionist, and since then I've decided to no longer do so. Now, what happens is that I don't think we've been clear as to why and where gender abolition is, for us, not a good fit. And this is something Zena and I have bounced back and forth on. So I wanted to go over a couple different things.
Well, and I do want to be clear as well. We've heard a number of different definitions from people, from a variety of people. And this is why I think it took so long to kind of nail down what we were talking about and what others were talking about. Because sometimes they would use gender abolition and we'd be like, no, that's super solid. Like, that's the thing. Sometimes they'd be using gender liberation or something else. And we'd be like, wait, but that's actually it. But wait, this other person that's using gender abolition actually meant this other word here. So let's get into it.
Well, and the problem is the term gender abolition can be used a couple different ways. There's the original term it was used in second wave feminism, which means to get rid of all the gender roles and things that make gender in some ways restrictive, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but often there's a hop people are doing there, which is they want to get rid of gender as a whole. And in the last several months, I don't really think that's silly. I actually think that's impossible. And I'll explain why. As far as I can tell, gender abolition, when used in other ways, can be talked about as either the anti-gender movement, which is the anti-gender ideology, i.e. TERFs and conservatives don't teach gender ideology in our schools. So beyond just its feminist roots and the potential conflation with the anti-gender movement, we also have this, postgenderism. Postgenderism is a social, political, and cultural movement which arose from the eroding of cultural, psychological, and social roles of gender, and an argument as to why the erosion of binary gender will be liberatory. Okay, so far so good. Postgenderists argue that gender is an arbitrary and unnecessary limitation on human potential, and foresee elimination of involuntary psychological gendering in the human species as a result of social and cultural designations and through the application of neurotechnology, biotechnology, and assistive reproductive technologies. Advocates of postgenderism argue that the presence of gender roles, social stratification, and gender differences are generally to the detriment of individuals and society. Given the radical potential for advanced assistive reproductive options, postgenderists believe sex for reproductive purposes will either become obsolete or that all post-gendered humans will have the ability if they so choose. So, real quick, let's talk about this. The reality of this is what it's talking about is essentially a transhuman argument. You can see down here as well that this is actually part of the transhuman school. Transhumanism is essentially a school of philosophy looking to transcend the limitations of humanity in various ways. It's often associated with the cyberpunk genre or, really, really advanced cyberpunk genre, something like Altered Carbon, where you can just sleeve into new bodies, which would be badass. But anyway, I tend to think of myself as somewhat transhumanist as well. The problem I have with this definition is that gender differences are generally to the detriment of individual society. And where I would argue is social stratification, bad. Gender roles, bad. But gender differences, we need to get clearer on. Because to some degree, what's happening in this is they're talking about two different phenomenon. Gender differences that are observed by a society and gender differences that are observed in the person. So what do I mean by that? So it is assumed in our society that women are more meek and tend to be softer spoken. Men are assumed to be more forceful and direct, right? Now, arguably, most of that is just social construction. That's just behavior being taught over and over again through social stratification and through, and assume that that's a gender difference. Now, we could make the argument that there is some biological correlate to that, perhaps, maybe some small amount. That is, we see the differences with trans women versus trans men when they start HRT. Trans women tend to find themselves more accessive to their emotions. They tend to be able to touch into their emotions in ways they didn't experience previously, while trans men tend to be able to call on things like anger, things like that more so. This is not true for everybody, and I'm not trying to make broad generalizations. This is just my understanding in the broadest sense, okay?
Yeah, just to give a little bit there, I think I know some emotions kind of shifting from very much on like the outside and very like large to kind of more like an inner centered kind of feeling for me. So just a little context there.
But those differences, whether there is some kind of biological correlate, and again, arguably from a transhumanist perspective, that biological correlate really is meaningless because theoretically you could just change your biology either through some sort of biotech or through some sort of, cyber tech, whatnot, that kind of thing. So this is all kind of fantasy stuff at this point, though science is getting closer and closer. Things like, CRISPR, as well as, we've actually started creating like very real like early on cybernetics, like, prosthetic hands, things like that. Jason here says crying becomes more difficult. True. Right. That I've heard that from a lot of trans men. Mm-hmm. And so let's keep going. So this I don't have a huge issue with, other than it makes an assumption that gender differences might be social. I would argue that may not be the case, but this isn't a big issue. When TERFs talk about gender abolition, and what they're talking about is getting rid of the gender restrictions, but maintaining, these days, at least the second wave ones are trying to maintain still the differences between sex, which gets very dicey because some of the ways we talk about sex are biological, that is bimodal system by which there appears to be two extremes, and whether we're talking about gender, it seems to be something they conflate a lot because it's actually advantageous for them politically to conflate those two things because they are trying to erase trans people. Right? So let's keep going. So over here we have abolition of gender. This is on Rational Wiki. Bear with me. The abolition of gender is based on the idea that all aspects of gender, not merely stereotyped gender roles, should be eliminated from society. The idea is a central tenet of post-genderism, which we just talked about, and is a product of the philosophical movements advocating for both social change, e.g. radical feminism and the LGBT movement, and technological advancement, e.g. transhumanism. Unfortunately, the concept has been co-opted by TERFs and other transphobes as a dog whistle. True. So we can kind of just go through here and look at this, but the idea being is that there is an assumption that's being made in these discussions about gender that I think is faulty. Mm-hmm. Can anyone in chat tell me what that is? I'll give you guys a minute. Because to some degree, there's a massive assumption going on here that I feel like is very problematic. When TERFs talk about gender abolition, they usually want to break down the gender norms of right now to make their own. True. The gender is something imposed from up high. Yeah. So yeah, Very Rona's on the right track. Gender is something that is, by definition, always socially placed upon you, right? Minerva says gender is entirely a construct instead of like language. I disagree. Both are constructs. But here's where the construct gets different. There is a difference between, as we've said on this channel before, race and gender. Both are social constructs, right? But the reason why we don't accept the terms of someone who's, say, transracial, racial, like Rachel Dolezal, for example, is because race is a thing wholly created at a societal level that is then oppressed and oppressed upon you. Technikitty says there's no benefit from gender. True, right? So race in this case would only be something that's given to you. Race is not a real thing. It's a construct we created for power dynamics, really. Beyond Safe Word says it assumes that all gender expressions are undesirable, the product of oppressive power hierarchies. True. And a lot of anarchists and a lot of different, like, sort of leftist libertarians like these ideas because they want to get rid of hierarchy. Often it's specifically like toxic or unhealthy hierarchies, though the more extreme folks tend to be against all hierarchies. I don't know if you can ever get rid of all hierarchies, but I think being very suspect of power is always a good thing to do. Yeah, so beyond safe words, when I use transracial, what I'm referring to is the co-opted term that a lot of people are aware of. You're right. The term transracial actually has a legitimate meaning. It is an actual thing, as beyond safe word says. It refers to someone of one race who is raised by a family of a different race, usually in cases of adoption. Dole's all co-opted the term. True. So again, we're not hating on the actual meaning of transracial, but in the way it's been used in this sort of co-opted method, this idea that you can somehow change your race feels like it's not really an accurate thing because gender and race don't feel like the same thing. And people are right. The assumption here is that gender is always bad. They're actually conflating those in similar ways. Race is used to create hierarchies and the like. In the same way, they assume gender is always that as well. I would argue that this is actually faulty. Zena and I have gone over this numerous times about the idea that there seems to be something beyond gender that society places upon you. Well, yes, Callan, gender is fluid, but it's not just that gender is fluid, it's that gender is also something that seems to be a lived experience. I'll get to more of this in a little bit, but the problem with social constructive theory is it doesn't account for young people. What I mean by that is, let's say you have an AMAP kid, right, assigned male at birth, who at age 3 just tells their parents flatly, I'm a girl. Now, you can argue this kid has had some level of socialization, but anyone that knows, like, developmental psychology knows that gender, there's no way this kid was actually socialized fully in gender. There might be, like, basic ideas, and that might have a preferential status in the kid's mind because of their internal experience. But Julia Serrano talks about this. I think the term she uses is your internal sex, or how she provides, like, your internal experience of your sex. I forget the exact language. Kira could probably tell me. But essentially what I call it is an emergent self schema. That is, it is the idea that there appears to be some internal experience of gender, whether that is nothing at all or anywhere in the spectrum, that seems to exist a priori of society. And this is the idea that gender, even if we got rid of gender in society and all the restrictions, people would still have preferences and an internal experience that would probably be something akin to gender, even if we want to call it something else. Intrinsic inclination. Yep, there you go. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kara. She used another term in Whipping Girl too, but I can't remember what it is.
Yeah.
So I want to check out this article because I think it's really interesting. And we'll come back to emergent self-schema in a minute, but I want to check out this article. This is by a lady by the name of Toni Dorsey. She's a sociologist, psychologist, scientist, and researcher. She is a woman of many races. And I found her entirely by accident by going through and looking up things about gender abolition. And I like her stuff. I don't know if I agree with all of it, but I think it's really interesting. I wanted to look at this article and see what people's thoughts are, because what I want to do is change the language going out there of, instead of being focused on gender abolition, which I think is confusing and bad communication, and instead what I think me and Zena want to do is change the term something akin to gender liberation.
Yeah. Yep.
Because what we're trying to do is move away from the social restrictions of gender that appear to be entirely arbitrarily assigned based on physical observation. Right? So she says, what is the problem with gender abolition? So a few people have been wondering why it is that I go after the idea of gender abolition. This is, by the way, from September 7th, 2014. There are many reasons, but the chief one is that it is used as a tool by people who do not actually care about it to attack, defame, and justify violence against trans people while seeming decent despite their hate speech, which will strike some folks as pretty sad, given that it is also many other really nasty things. Nevertheless, let's look at these claims regarding gender abolition and why it is so wrong. So she's coming in kind of forceful. Cool. I like it. They are not trying to abolish gender. They aren't. They admit it as well. But they do not realize they are admitting it. When confronted, what they mean when they say gender abolition is the abolition of gender roles and sometimes gender behaviors and gender expression. You have to wheedle this out of them because they will describe these 3 distinct parts of gender as if they are all one thing. They are not the same thing, nor are they one thing. They are parts of gender. So what they really want to do is get rid of our parts of gender. They do not want to get rid of the language issues. They do not want to get rid of the way we gender objects by declaring them male or female. The action of saying that something is male or female is an act of implying gendered concepts and therefore using gender. Now, the argument they will often use in defense of their statements... Yes?
Sorry, no, I was not a...
That was a nudge?
That was not a booping, sorry.
That was not a booping? You were getting something off me?
No, I just booped you because my brain fluttered out.
Okay.
I was not...
I love you.
I'm listening and a little zony at the same time.
Can I continue?
Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Sorry, there you go.
They do not want to get rid of the way we gender object, yada yada. Now, the argument they will often use in defense of their statements is that they are arguing it from a feminist perspective. In this perspective, it is explicitly excludes biological aspects. So referencing any sort of social construction relating to biology, such as saying that then only sex would be left, is a direct contravention of this idea, since the social constructions themselves are part of the social conventions and structures that are parts of gender. I have already pointed out on several occasions that they do not understand what a social construct is, and that they do not understand what gender is. So I won't go into more depth on that at this time, unless I get a wild hair and decide to make another combo post. But they're not realizing that gender is composed of multiple distinct parts is part of the flaw in their thinking, and is a holdover from a very cis-centric and very limited way of thought that is influenced by their hostility towards trans people. If you're going to abolish gender, you would need to abolish all of it. Otherwise, you are not going to achieve your goal, since all of these parts, language, biology, expression, behaviors, are all interdependent. Mm-hmm. They treat it as an academic exercise without consequences. Invariably, they use the phrasing and the idea in order to gain credibility among their in-group, without consideration for what it really is. When they do consider it, they apply it as a kind of mental exercise that is purely academic without regarding the harm it would cause. Their focus is on the outcome and not the way they would achieve it. The outcome they invariably arrive at is that the world would be a better place, so that the exercise really looks like, say we abolish gender, ? Profit, right? The world is better. If you don't believe me, ask them how they plan to achieve that stuff in the middle. For them, this is little more than an academic exercise, not something they honestly expect to ever achieve. So it becomes strictly a rhetorical tool by which they further oppress and harm trans people. Now, I'm going to say that her continued assessment of harm, I'm going to come back to because I have an issue with it, but let's keep going. Occasionally, one of them will say that they would hope that people would see the benefit and change for the better peacefully, which is mighty naive and incredibly juvenile of them to think, akin to the way they often criticize pageant contests and the world peace answer. How would you convince them? Are you going to use the culture you live in, which has only the most superficial connections to their cultural ways of seeing gender? How are you going to deal with cultures where gender is defined by what you do instead of your anatomy, and so forth? In the end, this brings us to the next problem. The idea is based on Western conceptions of gender. The argument around the value and benefit of getting rid of gender all surrounds a couple of different aspects. The most overtly hostile to trans people, one is the one they use to make it seem like they're being supportive. Without gender, you wouldn't have to transition. Ew. Mathadu says, there are some false claims in here. There's a difference between I don't know how to achieve this and it'll take generations to achieve. But they still don't ever tell you what it'll be, Mathaldu. I'm actually going to push back on that. I actually think that's functionally incorrect. Saying it'll take generations to achieve is actually just sort of a placeholder for something profit. Right? I need you to tell me in demonstrable steps how we would achieve this socially. If you can't say that, then I don't know. I don't know how that's actually a useful theory or a useful plan. Socialism as a whole makes sense to me because it's the decommodification of anything that affects human life and eventually the decommodification of anything. That has some tangible effect in the world. We've done that. We've decommodified things. Governments decommodify things all the time. But without an actual roadmap, this sounds like it could get very dangerous. And as we've shown, when we say gender abolition, we actually mean a couple different things. right? It's like TERFs calling themselves feminists. When people say feminists now, are they talking about genuine feminism or are they talking about TERFs? We know they're not talking about TERFs as trans people, but cis people don't always get that distinction. Much like saying my plan is to win until they end the contest. It's not a goal and it's a goal, not a plan. True. It sounds best if you say it in a breathy, childlike voice. But the more serious aspects of it are that it is based on Western conceptions of gender and the way that gender in society is structured around genitals and secondary sex characteristics. This classification of people is not a universal one for gender. There are some that classify someone's gender entirely on what they do, their interests, activities they enjoy, and some do it as a blended form of both physical and the activity. By which I mean that they choose the choices you are allowed later in life through the socialization of you as a person into that culture are going to be based on what you enjoy on your genitals, as they are in the US, or on a combination of both. Western gender roles proceed from the designation, whereas other systems designate sex according to the gender roles. It is the reverse, much like how most Americans find the Japanese system of house numbering to be incredibly confusing, and all of which ignores that gender is a superpositional concept. Yeah. It is based on the implication of genitalia and signified in multiple ways that are entirely based on the cultural norms of society, which means to achieve their goals, they must destroy other cultures. Getting back to that question mark, they seem to think that this somehow this one thing will overcome all other societal aspects of differing cultures and varying identities and magically change the world for the better. Yet, if you say to them they are engaging in magical thinking, literally, then they get defensive and deny it. And so you have to take them at face value if you're acting in good faith. And that means that they are willing to engage in the Western notion of manifest destiny and righteous propriety and actively colonize and override. And in the end, force entire other groups of people who have very different ideas of gender and propriety and destroy those cultures. Gender is superpositional. I'm sorry, it must be said that freaking sentence rocks. What did I just speak?
It is supposed to be supposition.
Suppositional? Superpositional, I still hold by. But yes, suppositional. I apologize, I misread. If family is the building blocks of a society, then gender is the building blocks of the family. That is how deep it lies within our given culture. At the roots, as they note and claim, and what they mean is that in attacking it, the ripples throughout the culture and society will ultimately destroy it. It will no longer be the culture and society that it was. There are real-world parallels for this activity, most notably in the treatment of indigenous populations of many different nations. I live just off a main street named Indian School Road, and the connotations for me as a Lakota and to the people here who are Navajo, Hopi, and Apache, and more, and who were stripped of their homes in order to teach them a new way of thinking, has had incredible consequences on their culture. This is why the idea is racist, colonialist, imperialist, and white supremacist. It is especially anti-Black, anti-Asian, and Pacific Islander, and anti-Indigenous. And that leads us to the next point, which thankfully is, they cannot achieve their goal. The biggest issue is that gender is a social construct, and there has, in all of human history, never been an abolishment of a social construct. That is not to say that it isn't possible, but it is meant to indicate that doing so is so unlikely and improbable as to be outside the range of thinking. Social constructs can be diluted, changed, warped, altered, reduced in import, raised in import, and assorted other things, but ending them and abolishing them has never happened, nor is it likely to happen given the nature of the human social systems and the depth within cultural systems at which gender systems exist. So that is why gender abolitionism is a pile of manure being sold to the gullible and the uninformed. Thoughts? Because my argument would be is that that's pretty based. I disagree with certain things, but yeah. It sounds like A, an unachievable goal. B, it seems to be entirely based on a very limited Western notion of gender. Jason, here, you disagree. Say more. Okay, take some time. We'll come back to you. My issue with this is that, and I want to be really clear, is that I think that gender, by its nature, is not just socially constructed, or if it is socially constructed, that is, it is something that society as a whole agrees upon and has constructed on its own ways. Mm-hmm. I would say that generally society as a whole usually interacts with something real. It's just the interpretation changes. Thaldu says, my main disagreement is this has never happened before, so it can't. Yeah, but there have always been people who have absolutely worn fur skins and pretended to be animals or like fucking skin changers and shit. That is literally built into human history. There's actually a whole bunch of psychological research on furries. This is actually a very old concept. Furries are just the most modern incarnation of it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, that archetype's been around forever.
I know, because I'm a fucking yeen.
Well, not just archetype, but that whole concept and the way that people interact with animals. Yeah.
If we look at gender as a pivot around which prejudice occurs, we could probably apply 3-stage models of contract theory, decategorization, salient, generalization, and recategorization. The problem arises in the third part. What do we categorize around? Mass, feminine, presentation, spectrum, maybe. I'm not sure, to be honest. Fair. Animal, gods, spirits. Mm-hmm. Yep. My main issue is largely with the conflation of progressive and regressive gender abolition. I think, hold on while I think this. So my response to that is that, skinwalkers, thank you, Lady Rain. Skin changers, where did I get that? I don't know, whatever, I don't care. So, but the problem is that there's not really a way to know between them. If someone says they're a gender abolitionist, like if we say Vosh is a gender abolitionist and some TERF says they're a gender abolitionist, how do we know the difference? Well, we have to then go into their descriptions. And what they want demonstrably is difference in regards to society. They want a very different thing. So to me, the read of this is that to some degree, these people are talking about different things, but using the same term, which is bad fucking communication. So here's my argument.
And this is both of us. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Zena's help with this as well. We both kind of talk this back and forth. Anything here, again, standard issues. Mm-hmm. So what I've done here is begin the very basics of an idea. And to me, I think this is a really interesting thing. So what I described as gender, a grammatical categorization, often designated as male, female, or neuter, or neither, used in the classification of nouns, pronouns, adjectives, and in some languages, verbs that may be arbitrary or based on characteristics such as sex or animacy, and that determine agreement with or selections of modifiers, reference, or grammatical form, right? What I would argue is that gender, as me and Zena see it, appears to be an emergent self schema.
Yes.
So what do we mean when we say that? Emergent, coming into view or existence or notice. Emerging, rising above a surrounding medium, especially a fluid. So when I say emerging, what I'm referring to is there is a constant process of gendering that is happening to the individual. Anyone who has transitioned knows this.
Yep.
The way you internally experience yourself as disconnected from your gender when you first start to transition, but having a intuitive knowing of what you are, versus 5 years later when you've been on hormones for a while and you've started to live and engage in certain ways. Mm-hmm. The problem is that what we get into is your experience of gender is going to change. People's experience of womanhood changes. As Callan has noticed several times, it's fluid, right? But it's not just fluid as in people are gender fluid. That's one stopping point, but more in the sense of there's even a fluidity in each gender as you come to experience and deal with it.
Right. New experiences shift in the way that you understand yourself.
Correct.
Right. And this process is constantly always happening.
Yeah. And so what I want to say, but that's not what a gender abolitionist is. We've already covered that. Jason here, but we just covered that. What you're saying there is bad communication. By saying you're a gender abolitionist in that form, you're saying I want to eliminate the prescriptive roles around this. Just say you're a liberationist. That's my point. You're literally making my point for me. That the term that a lot of the online left uses for gender abolition is bad communication. Zena has had this argument numerous times in private because we've sat there and debated, what does that even mean?
Yep. That's how I started this video.
But this is not just even a semantic distinction. I'm actually saying that what you're saying is a dog whistle. It's actually potentially undercutting your goal because people may see you saying one thing when you mean the other.
No worries, Jason here. Also, feel free to get some sleep. You can always catch us later, okay?
Thank you, Lady Ray Cloud. Appreciate it. So, what is the self? The total, essential, and particular being of a person, the individual, the essential quality in distinguishing one person from another, right? One's consciousness of their own being or identity, the ego, right? We talk about this in our Zen stuff. The self is a construct that appears to come about through self-referencing awareness, right? I'm here, you're over there, we appear to be two, right? And so we go with that story and we start to construct one based on a whole bunch of factors, right? Same problem arose with the abolished police movement. Yeah, because it's bad communication. And then schema, a plan or outline, a pattern imposed on complex reality or experience to exist in explaining it, mediating perception, or guided response. So in psychology, a psychological schema is basically describes a pattern of thought or behavior that organizes categories of information and the relationships among them, right? So it's the way you look at the world. It's your internal schema. But, and this is what we'll cover in another video sometime, I just want you guys to get a brief taste of what I'm working on. Self-schema refers to a long-lasting and stable set of memories that summarize a person's beliefs, experiences, and generalizations about the self in specific behavioral domains. A person may have a self-schema based on any aspect of themselves as a person, including physical characteristics, personality traits, and interests, as long as they are considered that aspects of their selves to be important to their own self-definition. Mm-hmm. Do you know a single fucking trans person who doesn't consider their transness a large part of them? I mean, I know there's Blair White and She Lies, but like seriously, what I just described could easily describe gender, right? And this is why I think that this is really important. To some degree, what I think is happening is the thing we're talking about as gender keeps getting conflated as this social construct. And what we really mean is there's a social phenomena construct of gender that also appears to be something inborn and known to the person. This is why a 3-year-old kid can know she's a girl, even if she was signed male at birth. Because you cannot argue in any meaningful way that she has had enough socialization to know what being a boy is, only that she knows she's not one. Social constructivist theory, in my opinion, does not account for that kid, but we know there are kids like that. Hyrulean Hellhound, I disagree with that part entirely. Something different, I disagree. No, they don't. Hyrulean Hellhound, that's objectively incorrect.
If you want to disagree, I need you to post some data.
Post some data in the Discord. I'm more than happy to go over it. But again, socialization is a lifelong process, and development theory is something that takes a large amount of time. You're telling me kids understand intricate social interactions when they don't even have a fully developed sense of self by the age of 3 to 5? No, it really doesn't. That's not socialization. It's just identification. See, I think you guys are really getting hung up on this, and it's actually really interesting to me because in a lot of ways, this is my problem with the online left, is that when we talk about this, everyone wants to turn gender into a social construct, but the issue is that when it is defined as such, no one knows what that actually means. And so the problem is that you leave yourself open to bad argumentation, right? Because the issue is social constructs can be ignored, according to some. TERFs try to do it. Conservatives try to do it. But if you say that gender by its nature is an inherent trait to somebody, it is something that is an intuitively known thing, they can't argue with that, guys. Do you get that? Yeah, gender identity can emerge as early as 3, but full gender socialization by 3? Not even a little bit, Wednesday. I will argue this to the fucking nth. Guess I'm coming from an experience being very around young children.
Right, so when you have a child who's been socialized their entire, 3 years of life as a girl, what in that point causes them to go, I'm a boy, right? Like that's
We don't measure the self, Methaldu. I think you're actually, and walking into the realm of appeasement, that sounds like a value judgment and a really weird political statement. I don't genuinely know what you mean by that. And then risking people claiming that they can measure it. Again, I disagree. Because they have observed what girls are like and what things girls like, and they like those things.
Yeah. So Minerva's kind of coming up, just mentioned identification versus socialization, right?
Yeah, right. This is the exact distinction, is that a younger kid, even if they have some mild, early on socialization of gender, their identification, the way they experience their internal gender, is still going to be informed by the outside. This is why I think you guys are getting this confused. What we're saying is that gender is actually the intersection between whatever this intuitive knowing is and the external information from socialization. It's not just an internal factor, and it's not just the external one. It is both.
Self-schema, remember we were talking about, also involves
your contractor.
Outside stuff also.
No, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's appeasement, Methaldu. I think you're projecting. Yeah, I agree that gender identity does come out early that Wednesday, but we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is how gender identity interacts with socialization, because that's the thing that these folks are getting confused. They think this is entirely a socially prescribed thing, which I'm saying isn't the case, because otherwise, why would you want to transition? There's got to be some internal knowing of what your gender is, which is informed by the outside, because obviously the genders and their roles and their systems, girls like pink, boys like blue, etc., are all there. Yeah, but Hyrule and Hellhound, you're just agreeing with me. You're literally just agreeing with me there. There's not even a contradiction, because what you just said there, as far as the intersection of those things, is the same thing. That's literally what I'm saying the whole time. No, I want to use it because I think it's accurate with Aldu. I also think it has that utility. Please don't strawman me. I'm really serious. I will ban you from chat if you're going to strawman. Giving one example of one of the utilities of a thing does not wholly make an argument, and to actually spell out the entire argument would require me to go through the entirety of this document. So I need you to understand this from a certain perspective. This is a very rudimentary sort of thing that I'm putting together, but it's bringing up a point as to what I don't even know what a strawman means in the context. What you're essentially doing is reducing my argument down to some one-note utility that was going to be beneficial to going against TERFs and the like, and that's the only use it has or only function, when in reality what we're doing is using this as a self-description that actually better discusses it. Again, is there a way to falsify this? Maybe.
Falsify what?
The theory.
Oh, okay.
Here's that way. Yeah, we can, though. We can get data on it because we can easily try to start understanding what that internal process is. Bethaldu, I understand that you said primarily, but the issue is that it does seem like you're pushing back on that one point. And again, I don't know what your political values are, but it seems like there's an assumption that that's the goal or primary goal, but I never said primarily. So there's still an assumption that you're just playing semantics right now. No, I think you're just getting hung up on language, Hyrulean Hellhound. I'm going to be really honest. I actually feel myself really getting frustrated with chat right now because I think you guys aren't getting this, and it's actually a little bit bothersome to me because we've talked about these data points before, and one of those things about why gender abolition doesn't work for me. Psychosocialism is absolutely correct. That is the way you would figure this out, test for it, etc. Wednesday said, part of the problem here is that we can't get data on this. Yes, we can. Self-reports. Sorry. I really feel like you guys are just needling, and I'm not really clear why. So gender abolition in this case, that's my point. It's an ambiguous concept that actually talks about multiple different theories, and it's bad communication, Hyrulean Hellhound. Okay, Callan, again, how would you you can falsify this all you want. I mean, yeah, this would need research and data. I'm just putting forth the idea to you guys, but you all seem very allergic to it, and it's really weird. Yeah, and that's the problem. People get fucking emotionally attached, Jason here, to a concept they don't actually understand. You're saying one thing and it can be taken as multiple. Do you mean the transhumanist variation? Do you mean this? Right? Correct, Going Machine. My values and goals are to work out how gender is mental feedback loop between individual and society, started eons by humans, and I'm frustrated the way you say a child can know enough to say I'm a girl, but claim the child can't have received this knowledge from society. I'm saying they received some level of knowledge, Methaldu. I'm just saying there's no way they can understand the whole of gender. There are some levels of there are some levels of socialization, obviously between age 0 to 3. No one would make that argument.
The point being, you can receive some knowledge from society, but also there's an internal knowing, an internal way in which
I have to
something in you cues that this is a thing going on with you, right? Like that's what we're getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's both of these things going on. I also don't understand mental feedback loop. That's a weird way to put trans arguments.
Or gender arguments. Again, yeah, I don't think it's a feedback loop. I mean, I would say to some degree it seems to be a enforced thing. And again, a feedback loop would mean it couldn't break by definition, because the problem is that wouldn't account for older trans people. The sudden moving of this is what I am to this is what I am. There's a certain level of identification. The sudden aha awareness of, oh, wait, I'm trans. See, I don't know how you can prove there is an internal thing where it can be explained wholly as socially received. But it's not just socially received. I'm actually making the argument that there's an internal knowing of this that precedes some level of society. There's a knowing of this is how I wish to be, and then that correlates with certain variations of society. How else would you know you're trans otherwise?
Both is good, right? That's kind of what we're at here.
Yeah, like if you're making the argument that it's wholly socially constructed and socially received, then it basically just breaks down being trans is basically a preference. Like, how does that, there's an internal knowing. You knew that you were off from this. Plevius, I think that to some degree, no, because the problem is that then you still get into it. Now you're creating it. You're now just trying to dominate one definition into the whole of a very ambiguous issue.
Wednesday, we're saying both. Both of these things are most likely at play. There's something internal and also could be potentially infinite things external informing this. Yeah, both. Yep.
Yeah, as a person learns. Yeah, but again, Methaldu, you're ignoring the fact that there are trans kids.
Yeah, Wednesday.
I just don't think you have the developmental background on this. This is really what I'm going to get to. We've talked about this with integral theory. We've actually talked about this with numerous things. No, there hasn't hypnotic genes. That's why I'm putting it forth as an idea.
So this is where we're coming to is kind of integrating schema theory and stuff, because, like Wednesday said, if I grew up and I got socialized as a girl and there was never any possible socialization of the ability to be something different, right? Where did that knowing come from? Mm-hmm. If I only got, it's possible to be a girl and this is how you be a girl. Well, how did you know that there was something else going on?
Yes.
Right.
Minerva, that's exactly right. And I would say that why would anyone have a preference? Again, I don't like the tabula rasa nonsense. Lady Cuck, stop being so obtuse. Right? Holy shit. So I'm not going to get lost down the fucking...
rabbit hole.
Right? Yeah, I'm not going to get down the rabbit hole. I'm going to say very clearly that it feels like... Yeah, repression would have eliminated trans... Yeah, exactly, psychosocialism. Thank you, for the love of Christ. Yeah, they're just mapping systems. And as she pointed out, those mapping systems are different between cultures. Again, what is going on here? Methodically counter-question, how does a child know which music it prefers? Because they have an internalized knowing and preference. But let me ask you this, is your gender a preference? Because it doesn't seem to be that. It seems to be something inherently known to you. Once you have enough data points outside of yourself to kind of point to what that is called or known, you do that. Now, obviously, if you're xenogender or whatnot, little different. Anyway, I wanted to throw these ideas out here. I didn't expect chat to completely, just not understand. But anyway, my point with this is that to some degree, there needs to be a better argument than just social construction, because social construction is really, really weak because not everyone knows what that is. Yeah, I'm throwing you all under the bus. Y'all piss me off.
Maybe we'll have to watch like
Correct psychosocialism. God, this is so easy.
Dr. Z's got a good video on this
Psychosocialism, you get back your gold star. I love you. So, yeah. But what I want to break very clear is that I think gender abolitionism is a really bad type of communication. It's something that is referring to at least 2, if not 3 different things. And we are actually, right? It's something that actually, to some degree, doesn't communicate what our goals are. Gender liberation, to be liberated from the enforcement of gender, actually serves trans liberation, trans goals. Why? Because we're also trying to get away from the restrictions of gender that are forced upon us, the exact reasons why, right? Why people tell me that I still have to be a boy when I'm not. So this is the thing. I think gender abolitionism is cringe because it is bad communication and it doesn't actually communicate what our goals are, because every time someone tries to explain it, they have to go into a fucking huge discussion to explain what they mean, because it's not good communication. When you say socialism, generally you have an idea. When you talk about, liberal democracies, you at least have a mapping system. But when you talk about, right, gender abolition.
Well, are we also starting from a place of just what abolition means on its own definition too?
Yeah, just the use of the word abolition is just bad.
Yeah.
Mythology, I don't think there's differences in semantics. I disagree with that inherently. So with that said, I'm going to end this segment here. I'll probably yell at chat some more, but with that said, we will, I'm going to start pushing towards gender liberation and go from there.
Keep revisiting some of this stuff too.
True. All right. So we'll see you in the next one. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, consider donating to us. You can support us on our website, transgirltherapist.org. You can also help us on our Patreon, link below, or you can become a member here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.